The conference room fell silent as Elise Chen, the ruthless CEO of Globetech Industries, watched $1.5 billion evaporate before her eyes. The international investors were walking out, speaking rapidly in languages none of her Harvard-educated team understood. But from the corner, a voice emerged, her driver, Marco, the same man she'd mocked just days earlier for bringing his daughter to work. "Gentlemen," he called out in flawless Mandarin, "perhaps I can clarify what Ms. Chen is proposing." In that moment, everything changed. If you're enjoying this incredible story of underestimation and redemption, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more life-changing narratives that remind us never to judge a book by its cover. Elise Chen had built Globetech Industries from the ground up over 15 years, transforming it from a small tech startup into a multinational corporation valued at over $4 billion. At 42, she was known throughout the business world for her brilliant strategic mind, unwavering focus, and unfortunately, her cold demeanor. The Wall Street Journal once described her as Silicon Valley's Ice Queen, a nickname she secretly despised but publicly embraced as evidence of her professional detachment. Her morning routine never varied: wake at 4:30 a.m., 90 minutes of yoga and meditation, a protein smoothie, and then into the car by 7 a.m. sharp. Her executive assistant had recently hired a new driver after the previous one quit without notice. "He comes highly recommended," Jenna had assured her. "Excellent driving record, prompt, professional, and available for the unusual hours you keep." Marco Rivera pulled up exactly on time that Monday morning in the company's sleek black Lincoln. He was in his mid-30s, with warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled and a quiet, confident manner. "Good morning, Ms. Chen. My name is Marco. I'll be your new driver." Elise barely looked up from her tablet. "Fine. We're headed to the main office today. I need to review some documents on the way, so no conversation is necessary." "Understood," he replied, closing her door gently. The drive progressed in silence until Marco's phone rang. He apologetically glanced at the screen before declining the call. 5 minutes later, it rang again. Elise sighed loudly. "I specifically requested no distractions. I apologize, Ms. Chen. It's my daughter's school. I'll turn the phone off." "Your personal matters shouldn't interfere with your work," she said coolly. "It won't happen again," Marco replied, his voice level but his knuckles widening on the steering wheel. When they arrived at the Globetech headquarters, Elise stepped out without a word of thanks. As she walked toward the gleaming glass building, she was already moving on mentally to the massive international deal she was orchestrating, a $1.5 billion merger with tech companies across Asia and Europe that would cement her legacy. The next morning, Elise was surprised to find a young girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, sitting in the front passenger seat when the car arrived. "What is this?" she demanded, standing by the rear door. Marco turned, looking uncomfortable but composed. "Ms. Chen, I apologize for the unexpected change. My daughter Sofia's school is closed for teacher training today, and my usual childcare fell through at the last minute. I called your assistant, but you decided to bring your child to work? This is completely unprofessional." Sofia shrank in her seat, clutching a worn backpack filled with books. "I understand this isn't ideal," Marco said calmly. "I can arrange for another driver if you prefer, though it might take an hour or so." Elise checked her watch. She had an 8 a.m. meeting she couldn't miss. "Fine. She stays in the car. And this cannot become a habit." The drive was tense until Sofia whispered something to her father in what sounded like Italian. He responded quietly in the same language, and the girl nodded, pulling out a book. "If you're going to speak, do it in English," Elise snapped, not looking up from her documents. "I apologize," Marco said. Sofia was just asking if she could read her book. "You speak Italian to your daughter?" "Her mother was Italian," he replied simply. "I want Sofia to keep her heritage." "Was?" Elise caught the past tense but immediately regretted asking. She passed away 3 years ago. The car fell silent again except for the soft sound of Sofia turning pages in her book, which Elise now noticed was in French. That's a French novel, she observed despite herself. Sofia looked up shyly. Yes, ma'am. I'm learning French in school. Dad helps me practice. You speak French too? Elise asked Marco, a hint of surprise in her voice. Among others, he replied without elaboration, eyes on the road. Elise found herself curious but refused to indulge it. This was her driver, not a colleague. His language skills were irrelevant to his ability to transport her from place to place. She returned to her documents, determined to maintain professional distance. Over the next week, Elise noticed small things about Marco that intrigued her despite her determination to keep their relationship strictly professional. He listened to news podcasts in German when he thought she was absorbed in work. Once, he took a brief call in what sounded like Arabic while waiting for her outside a coffee shop. When Sofia called to check in after school, they switched effortlessly between English, Italian, and something that might have been Portuguese. Still, Elise maintained her aloof demeanor, especially after overhearing 2 junior executives snickering about the CEO's chauffeur in the lobby. She couldn't afford to appear soft or sentimental, not when she was about to close the biggest deal of her career. On Friday afternoon, after a particularly stressful meeting, Elise climbed into the back seat and simply said, "Home." She closed her eyes, massaging her temples. After a few minutes of silence, Marco spoke quietly. "Rough day?" "Just drive," she responded automatically, then sighed. "Yes. The international merger is proving complicated." "The Asian-European Tech Consortium?" Elise's eyes snapped open. "How do you know about that?" Marco smiled slightly. "It's been in the business news for weeks. Plus, I overhear things. The Taiwanese investors are hesitant, and the German contingent is pushing for additional concessions?" She stared at him. "Do you make a habit of eavesdropping on your clients?" "Not at all. But I do stay informed about the companies I work for. It helps me provide better service." He paused. "For what it's worth, I think your approach is sound. The Taiwanese are traditionally cautious with new partnerships, especially when there are cultural differences at play. And you're an expert on international business now?" Elise couldn't keep the sarcasm from her voice. Marco didn't take the bait. "No, Ms. Chen. Just someone who's learned that understanding other perspectives can be valuable." They drove in silence the rest of the way, but Elise found herself mulling over his words as they pulled up to her penthouse apartment building. 7 tomorrow morning?" Marco confirmed as she gathered her things. "Yes," she replied, hesitating briefly. "Marco, how many languages do you actually speak?" He smiled slightly. 9, fluently. A few more conversationally." 9, she repeated incredulously. "Italian from my ex-wife, Spanish from my parents. I studied German and French in college. The rest I picked up during my time in the diplomatic corps." "You were a diplomat?" Elise couldn't hide her surprise. "Cultural attaché for the State Department for 11 years. I worked at embassies in Beijing, Dubai, Seoul, and Brussels." "And now you're a driver," she said, immediately regretting how it sounded. If Marco was offended, he didn't show it. "After my wife died, Sofia needed stability, not a father who traveled constantly or worked 16-hour days. This job has regular hours and allows me to be there for her." His expression was dignified, without apology. "We all make choices based on our priorities, Ms. Chen." The subtle rebuke wasn't lost on Elise. "Good night, Marco," she said quietly, stepping out of the car. "Good night, Ms. Chen." The next 2 weeks were crucial for finalizing the merger. Elise was working 18-hour days, her team pushing to the breaking point as they prepared for the arrival of the international delegation. The consortium included executives from Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Germany, France, and Saudi Arabia, representing the largest tech collaboration attempt in decades. Marco remained a constant, reliable presence, driving her to endless meetings and waiting patiently, often long into the night. Occasionally, Sofia would be in the car after school, always quiet and respectful, always with a book in hand. Despite her initial resistance, Elise found herself exchanging brief pleasantries with the girl, even discussing some of the books she was reading. The morning of the final negotiation arrived with a sense of electric anticipation. Elise dressed with extra care in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, her power outfit for closing deals. When she stepped into the car, Marco noticed her tension immediately. "Today's the big day?" "Yes," she admitted. "The international delegation arrived yesterday. If all goes well, we sign this afternoon." "You've got this," he said simply, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. Something about his quiet confidence steadied her. "Thank you, Marco." The morning session went smoothly, with Elise's team presenting the final terms of the merger. Her corporate language experts facilitated the discussions, though most of the foreign executives spoke excellent English. By lunchtime, she was confident the deal was secure. During the break, she spotted Marco waiting in the lobby. He'd been instructed to stay close in case she needed to retrieve additional documents from the office or home. "How's it going?" he asked when she approached. "Well, I think. We're reconvening in 30 minutes to sign." "Congratulations," he said with a genuine smile. "You've worked hard for this." Something about his sincerity touched her. For the first time, she felt like someone understood not just the professional achievement but the personal cost of her success. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. When negotiations resumed, however, everything began to unravel. The Taiwanese delegation huddled together, speaking rapidly in Mandarin. The Japanese and Korean executives exchanged concerned glances. The German contingent began a heated discussion in their native tongue. Elise's translators struggled to keep up with the simultaneous conversations. She could see the deal slipping away but couldn't understand what had triggered the sudden change. "What's happening?" she demanded of her chief translator. "Something about the intellectual property protections," he whispered. "But they're speaking too fast and using technical terminology I'm not familiar with." The Saudi investor stood up, saying something in Arabic that made his colleagues nod. They began collecting their papers. "Please," Elise said, her carefully constructed composure cracking. "If there's a concern, we can address it." The head of the Taiwanese delegation replied in accented English. "Ms. Chen, we appreciate your presentation. However, we feel there are significant cultural misunderstandings regarding our approach to shared development that make this partnership untenable at present." They were walking out. 15 months of work, $1.5 billion in potential revenue, her entire reputation, all evaporating in minutes. Then, from the doorway where he had been waiting with some documents she had requested, Marco's voice rang out, clear and confident, in perfect Mandarin. The Taiwanese executives stopped, turning in surprise as Marco addressed them in their native language. He spoke for nearly 2 minutes, his tone respectful but persuasive. Then he switched to Japanese, bowing slightly to that delegation. Korean followed, then German, French, and finally Arabic, moving smoothly between languages with a diplomat's precision. The room was silent when he finished. Elise stared at him, stunned by this transformation from her quiet driver to a multilingual negotiator addressing some of the most powerful business leaders in the world. The head of the Taiwanese delegation was the first to respond, in English this time. "Your colleague makes an excellent point about the traditional concepts of shared innovation in our respective cultures. Perhaps we were hasty in our concerns. If Ms. Chen is willing to include these cultural perspectives in the final agreement, as your associate suggests, we would be amenable to continuing," the German executive added. All eyes turned to Elise, who recovered quickly despite her shock. Of course. Marco, Mr. Rivera, has identified exactly the kind of cultural understanding we value in this partnership. If you'll give us an hour, we'll revise the agreement to reflect these principles. The tension in the room dissolved. The executives returned to their seats, now conversing amicably, many of them addressing questions directly to Marco, who responded in their native languages. An hour later, with the revised agreement in place and Marco's assistance in explaining the nuanced cultural additions, all parties signed. The historic $1.5 billion deal was complete. In the aftermath, as the international executives departed and her team celebrated, Elise found Marco waiting quietly by the door. "My car keys," he explained when she approached. "I left them when I brought in your documents." She stared at him, a mix of gratitude and confusion on her face. "You just saved the biggest deal of my career. Possibly the biggest deal of the decade in our industry." He smiled slightly. "Happy to help." "Help? Marco, what you did in there," she paused, collecting herself. "Why didn't you tell me you could do that?" "You never asked," he said simply. "I told you I worked as a cultural attaché. I mentioned that I speak 9 languages. But this level of business and technical knowledge. I worked primarily with technology companies during my diplomatic career, facilitating international partnerships not unlike yours." He shrugged. "It's amazing what people discuss in front of a driver they assume can't understand them." Elise felt a flush of shame at the memory of how dismissively she had treated him. "Why are you really driving for a living, Marco?" His expression softened. "I told you the truth. After Isabella died, Sofia needed stability. The diplomatic corps wanted to send me to Lebanon on short notice. I couldn't do that to her, not after she'd just lost her mother." He paused. "Every choice has consequences. I chose my daughter. I don't regret it." For the first time, Elise truly saw the man before her, not just a driver, but a father who had sacrificed career prestige for love, a brilliant mind who had chosen family over ambition. The contrast with her own life choices was stark and uncomfortable. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now?" He smiled. "Now I drive you home, Miss Chen. It's been a long day." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow I pick you up at 7, as usual." She shook her head. "That's not what I meant. After what you did today, you can't just go back to being my driver." "Why not?" he asked simply. "It's a good job that meets my needs." Elise took a deep breath. "Marco, I need someone with your skills and experience on my international team. The salary would be triple what you make now, with flexible hours to accommodate Sofia's schedule." He considered this. "And if I said I'm content where I am? I'd say you're wasting an extraordinary gift that could benefit many people, including your daughter," Elise replied. "And I'd ask you to at least think about it." Marco nodded slowly. "I'll consider it, on one condition." "Name it." "That you come to dinner at our home this Sunday," he said. "Sofia has been asking about you, and I make a decent risotto." Elise blinked in surprise. "Dinner? With you and Sofia?" "Yes, Miss Chen. A meal, conversation, perhaps even some relaxation." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I believe they call it, having a life outside work. You might want to try it sometime." For the first time in years, Elise Chen laughed, a genuine laugh that came from somewhere deep and long forgotten. "I'd like that, Marco. And please, call me Elise." 6 months later, Globetech's international division was thriving under its new head of global cultural relations, Marco Rivera, who worked closely with CEO Elise Chen to build bridges across languages and cultures. His office featured a small sofa where Sofia often did homework after school, surrounded by books in multiple languages. And on Sundays, without fail, Elise joined them for dinner, gradually learning that the true measure of success wasn't just in billion-dollar deals, but in the connections we forge when we look beyond titles and appearances to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. After all, sometimes the most valuable asset